You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 6th of May 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, China's President Xi Jinping makes his first visit to Europe in 5 years. We ask what he and the EU stand to gain from a tour that takes in France, Hungary and Serbia. Also ahead, Israel urges the evacuation of parts of Rafah in Gaza and shuts down Al Jazeera in Jerusalem.
It's a wide-ranging ban. We don't know how long it will be in place for, but it does cover this territory of the State of Israel.
We'll discuss the wider implications for not only the media coverage of the Gaza conflict, but also the geopolitics. We're in Bahrain to meet one of the country's leading contemporary artists.
We still don't have an art academy. There isn't that place where, you could go and learn. There isn't documented history.
Plus the papers from Kenya and the latest fashion news, including an update on the Met Gala from Paris. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Thousands of Hungarians have protested against the nationalist Prime Minister Viktor Orban at a rally weeks ahead of European Parliament and local elections. Panama's former security minister has won the country's presidential election, stepping in as a candidate after the former president was barred because of a money laundering conviction. And a concert put on by Madonna in Rio de Janeiro has drawn 1.6 million people to Brazil's famous Copacabana beach. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, in the last few hours, it's being reported that the Israel military has begun ordering Palestinians to evacuate eastern Rafah in Gaza. Israel's army radio said the order comes before a military attack. Well, joining me now to talk about this and other events over the weekend in the region is Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. A very good morning to you, Yossi.
Good morning, Emma.
So the Israeli military hasn't given any confirmation of this report on army radio, but there are signs that the order is coming now for people to evacuate Rafah.
Yeah, this is the reports there that at least 100,000 people were asked to evacuate. And the question whether this is a reaction to the killing of 3 soldiers yesterday in Kerem Shalom. This is part of putting pressure on Hamas because of the stalemate in the negotiation over a ceasefire and the release of the hostages. Or this is a decision by the Israeli government actually to enter Rafah, because as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, with or without an agreement, Israel is going to enter into Rafah, and what Israel, the government says, finish the war and complete its objective.
Where are these people supposed to go?
Well, they talk about going to Khan Yunis, but bear in mind, those are people that many of them been evacuated already, or displaced 3-4 times. It's not the first time during the last horrible 7 months that they are displaced and moving from place to place with little shelter. Only a few days ago, UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell warned that any ground operation would bring catastrophe on top of catastrophe. Half of the population of Gaza right now is crammed in Rafah, among them 600,000 children. So just imagine, whatever happens in the world, there are already, many of them are injured, sick, malnourished, traumatized. How they feel, even they need to evacuate, the fear it creates, the pressure even before the war, the actual military operation is taking place.
This evacuation order now, do we consider this to be the precursor to the military operation that Benjamin Netanyahu has said will come?
That's one of the possibilities. Yeah, it might be part of the pressure because the negotiation over truce and the release of hostages hit a brick wall. They are playing brinkmanship, and in many ways, both sides are almost as interested in not reaching an agreement, even more than reaching an agreement. Netanyahu is under pressure in his own government. Some of his far-right partners in government. What's the point for us to remain in coalition if Israel is not going into Rafah? This is their attitude, and they are not interested in the release of the hostages. It's not a priority. It's also Hamas that brought this as well calamity on its own people, and both sides need on this stage to declare victory, but both actually, and I mean the people are the one that paying the price right now.
Tell us a little bit more about you mentioned just there that neither side seemed to be keen to come to an agreement, but there was an awful lot of work done over the weekend, wasn't there? However, the mood changed, didn't it? Hamas going into talks in Cairo on Saturday saying, we are positive, we are keen for an agreement. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying that this was an offer that effectively Hamas did need to take. Yet by last night, we had Hamas leaving Cairo and neither side getting any closer to any kind of ceasefire agreement.
I think there is a mismatch when it comes to expectation from both sides and what serves their political purposes. It seems that the mediators are more interested in reaching an agreement. When it's Egypt, Qatar, and the United States that decides themselves. One of the sticking points there, Israel says, yes, we are ready for truce for probably up to 6 weeks for the release of 30 to 40 hostages, allowing humanitarian aid, but the war is not over. And Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu still insists there's going to be an operation in Rafah. Hamas says, what's the point for us to enter into such an agreement if the war is resumed? So they want end of war, which probably Netanyahu is incapable, unless the pressure comes from the outside, domestically is incapable actually to agree for. And this mismatch means that the pressure should come from the outside on both of them to agree, and for Hamas, for instance, to accept that, yes, 6 weeks is not what they're looking for, but it might create a different dynamic that eventually will lead to end of war without an Israeli offensive in Rafah. But at the same time, this is not guaranteed.
Yossi, let's move on to the news and the reports that we had yesterday of the Qatari broadcaster Al Jazeera being ordered to close its Jerusalem office. Israeli authorities raiding a hotel used by Al Jazeera that it uses as an office. Why has it done that now?
Yeah, you might think this shouldn't be the priority of a country in the middle of a war. And as we all know, if everything goes wrong, blame the media. And that's exactly what they do. And Al Jazeera, in this sense, because it's highly critical of Israel, it's also one of the channels that actually have journalists on the ground. They show what happens in Gaza day in, day out. Most Israelis don't actually watch it or have access to what Al Jazeera shows. And, instead, it's completely legitimate to criticize what Al Jazeera shows or doesn't show, but closing that is part of the paranoia that the media is going to dictate what's happening on the ground. This is going to influence. Bear in mind that there is another twist here. Al Jazeera is owned by Qatar. This is the country that's mediate a ceasefire as we speak. This guy already made the release of hostages before. So the reaction from Qatar was quite robust. So the time here is, as always with Netanyahu, has to do with domestic politics, to consolidate the base, to appease the far right within his government. So this is just another populist act by the government.
What do you think will be the effect of the fact that the Qatari broadcaster has effectively been kicked out when, as you say, Qatar and Egypt are the key mediators in the Hamas-Israel peace talks?
I think the Qataris in one way actually will see it as a victory for them, because you see Israel is actually as afraid of a TV station, and this the lack of any logical, rational thinking right now in the Israeli government. Al Jazeera is not the main problem that Israel needs to deal right now. So the reaction to this is criticizing Israel, making Israel look like more and more authoritarian when it closes the offices of a TV channel. But at the same time, they have interest in brokering the ceasefire. Egypt has an interest, because if there is a war in Rafah, continues in Rafah, it means more pressure of refugees entering into Egypt. So they will, in a way, they score points by showing we have a TV channels that shows what's happening in Gaza. Israel is the one that doesn't want the world to know what's happened there. But for us as Qatar, it's important to be the mediator in reaching a ceasefire.
And in terms of the way that the war in Gaza will be reported now, international media aren't allowed into the Gaza Strip. Israel prevents that from happening. As you say, Al Jazeera was the voice that was harshly critical of the Israeli operation, but had a much better insight into what was going on. What does that now do for the rest of the world's ability to bear witness to the events in Gaza?
There will be still journalists from Al Jazeera and others reporting. This is 21st century. What is not done sometimes if a camera is done with a mobile phone. If people don't see it on one of their TVs, they will watch it on the internet. It's very difficult to stop reporting for that. It just will make it more difficult. Again, I think we should remember that nearly 150 journalists were killed in Gaza only during this war. It's being a journalist, war journalist, is very dangerous as it is, and inciting against journalists make their work much worse. But if Israel wants to be a democracy, not only by name, it has to respect the work of journalists.
Do you think that will happen now, or how? Given the fact that there are indications that Israel and its government is going in exactly the opposite direction?
Yeah, and that's what Israel, there is needs to ceasefire, and ceasefire will lead probably to eventually to investigation of what happened since October 7 and the way the government is conducting the war, and hopefully also to election and a change of government. Israel, over not only the last 7 months, but over the last year and a half since the sixth Netanyahu government was formed, going all the wrong direction towards most authoritarian direction, and that's why it's desperately need election and a new government.
Yossi Meckelberg, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, for the first time in 5 years, China's President Xi Jinping is in Europe. He's on a tour that takes in the likes of France, Hungary and Serbia. His visit comes as China tries to avoid a trade war with the European Union and as the West hardens its stance towards Beijing over its relationship with Russia, spying scandals and concerns about Chinese influence in technology. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by Philippe Marlière, who's a professor of French and European politics at University College London. Welcome back, Philippe. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, there was this astonishing photograph, isn't there, on the tarmac of Xi Jinping and Gabriel Attal, the French Prime Minister, yesterday, covered by umbrellas. And everybody is looking at Xi Jinping because he seems to dominate the scene more than anything. I mean, does this set the tone for what's happening here?
Yes, it's quite stunning picture of Xi Jinping looking very confident and looking very pleased. Being received. It's a 5-star treatment, a red carpet treatment. It's a state visit. It's the first one in for quite a few years to Europe, and I think the fact that France has been chosen as one of the 3 countries to be visited is also a mark of recognition for France or France's diplomacy allegedly at least, because, France is probably being seen by China as a kind of a power broker between the US and Western nations on the one hand and China on the other. So the choice of the three countries to be visited has been, of course, very carefully made. And two others being Serbia and Hungary, the two difficult, one of them being a very difficult partner in the EU, and both being very pro-Russia. So very interesting choice to have on the one hand France and on the other two other countries which are currently pro-Russia in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine.
So let's focus on France first before we move on to Serbia and then on to Hungary. Xi Jinping said that Chinese-French relations have established, and I quote, a model for the international community of peaceful coexistence and win-win cooperation between countries with different social systems. And obviously a nicely positive phrase there. But the fact remains is that there are so many different layers of problems when it comes to China and its relationship with France and indeed the European Union.
Yes, absolutely. I think the two core messages from Macron will be, I guess, on Chinese support to Russia's military capabilities, first of all, and then the other big issue is the Chinese market distorting practices. I think France and the EU are very concerned about that, and the sort of the imbalance, sort of the trade relations between France, the EU, and China, I think, which of course benefits very largely China. So these are the two big things. I think it's not one or the other. I suppose Macron will try to bring up in the table these two issues.
Tell us a little bit more as well about the fact that today's meeting is between Emmanuel Macron and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. What does the EU try to do? What does it stand to gain from Xi Jinping's visit?
I think that the reason why Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission chief, is present together with Macron is of course a sign that the issues that Macron will try to discuss, will bring up in the table again, are EU issues as well. It's not simply French concerns, and that's what it means. And also, of course, if you bring the EU Commission chief to the negotiations, I think it's of course symbolically important, because it means it's the whole of the EU. Which is there to negotiate with China. So I think that's the meaning of it. But I think overall, let's not forget that Xi Jinping has decided to visit France, and is received by France. Let's also remember that France was Macron went to China in 2019. So you could point to a kind of relative warmth in the relations between China and France in general. Tell us
a little bit more, though, about much of the commentary that surrounds Xi Jinping's visit is that this is a sort of a reworking of a world order of a more permanent kind. That there is a need now to shift away from the United States, and that Xi Jinping wants to, and China wants to, make sure that the United States no longer has the influence that it has previously enjoyed.
Yes, I guess so, and that's why again France was seen as an important interlocutor, because this is traditionally France's diplomacy to be seen as a power broker in between the US and the other big blocs. Yesterday was Russia or the USSR. Today it's the rising superpower China. I think that's the recognition of that France has a role to play. Its message in world affairs is different from, say, other European partners. France has always wanted to be seen as a kind of independent player in world affairs. So hopefully that's what Xi Jinping will try to sort of exploit in a way, that France might have views which are different from other European nations, less pro-US in a way. And so we shall see about that.
You mentioned the fact that he's going to Serbia and Hungary too, two countries which are complicated when it comes to it. I mean, he's timed his arrival at his second stop in Serbia to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the NATO bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during the Kosovo War. I mean, that has weight to it as well. But there are financial connections and ties between Hungary and Serbia and China as well, isn't it? Most notably the Belt and Road modernisation of railways.
Yes, absolutely. On the economic front, that's exactly what binds or the China and Serbia and Hungary, and I think that's very important. I think the choice of Serbia and Hungary is essentially of a diplomatic nature. The fact that they've been so far the two most vocal supporters of Russia. And I think that's very important because that's really the role playing, and that's what Macron will try also to clarify. Are you really helping? Which I think it's quite a fact that China has been sending weapons, also machine tools. Chinese machine tools have been used to make weapons in Russia. So there's a great concern there, and so it's really a very interesting balancing act. On the one hand, to visit France, which has been lately very vocal in its opposition to Russia after a very slow start 2 years ago, and the two other countries, Serbia and Hungary, which have been very pro-Russian. So very interesting balancing act, and you can tell that Russia, as ever, is keeping its cards close to its chest. It doesn't pretends being a kind of a neutral actor in this conflict, whereas, as we know, it isn't.
Philippe Mallier, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come on today's programme.
Brendan Fraser took the fish and chips, said it was delicious, and I said, can I have a look at the Oscar? He showed me, and his name wasn't even on it. They get their Oscar engraved on the stand, then they come down, and obviously they're very hungry, and they eat there.
We hear what was on the menu at this year's Oscars from the British chef who cooked for the stars. Stay with us on The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers. I'm joined now from Kenya by Monocle's Nairobi correspondent Navina Kotto. Good morning, Navina. How's Nairobi looking?
Nairobi is looking very wet. I think we'll talk about that a bit later. But you won't hear the exuberance that you've heard in the last couple of months about the Nairobi weather from me today.
Okay, sorry, slightly more down tempo. Let's move straight on to the papers then. Chad is going to the polls.
Yes, Chad is going to the polls today. I think it is fairly clear or expected that Mohamed Idris Deby is likely to become president. He's currently running the country after he took over from his father 3 years ago. If we go back to 2021, his father, Idris Deby, ran the country for 20 years and then died miraculously on the battlefield. There is some speculation around whether he was actually killed on the battlefield. But today these elections are happening. I think the country and Deby are trying to portray it as a sort of transition to democracy and civilian rule. I think we have to take all of this with a pinch of salt, given that an opposition leader was killed in the run-up to the election. Opposition headquarters were set on fire. So I think the results that are expected today or tomorrow will not be a big surprise.
Okay, so what is expected for the wider region when we have Chad going to the polls?
I think it is a way to legitimize Debie's power, to show that he's showing willingness to include some kind of civilian elements or civilian procedures into the way he runs the country. Chad is still very close cooperation partner with Western countries. Various Western countries, including France, have a military base there. So I think the West is really hoping to continue this cooperation with Chad, while other countries have turned away from Western cooperation, like Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. But from what I understand, Mohamed Debie, the new incoming president, has already had talks with the UAE, talks with Russia. So I think we'll have to wait and see how close he remains to the West in the future.
Indeed, because we've seen coups in the region, including Chad, in the last 4 years. And Chad is the first of these countries to hold public elections, isn't it? So how much of a benchmark does this set?
Yes, I think, well, it is the first country to hold public elections. I think we have to ask ourselves what the value is of these elections if opposition leaders are being assassinated in the run-up to it. Yesterday in the capital, the military was invited to vote without the presence of election observers. That has already triggered a lot of criticism around the way these elections have been conducted. So I think while elections are important, the way they're being conducted are equally important. So I think it's obviously a small step, but probably not enough to justify it being called a democratic transition.
Let's move on to the continued stories of these floods that are taking place in Kenya. How are they being covered? What's the latest?
Yes, so the latest is that outside Nairobi, the River Nyando has burst its banks. There are rescue operations underway at the moment, and the road between Nairobi and Kisumu in the west is impassable. In the capital itself, depending on where you are, you will have woken up to lots of messages saying that main roads are impassable because they're flooded. Access to the United Nations and to the US embassies at the moment very, very difficult because the avenue called UN Avenue is flooded. And we're expecting a bit more of this over the next month. There were some warnings around a cyclone that was approaching the coast of East Africa, Tanzania and Kenya, but over the weekend, but that was not as bad as we thought it would be. I think there's still sort of houses being demolished within 30 meters of several rivers to avoid people getting stuck in floods. This is mostly in informal settlements where large sections of the population are living. And I think a large section of Kenyans are still expecting the president to declare a state of emergency and direct more funds to relief efforts.
Let's move to Zimbabwe now, a country which has got a new currency introduced about a month ago to replace the Zimbabwean dollar, not without teething problems.
No, I mean, I think there has been a lot of coverage of the world's newest currency. It's called the ZiG. They sort of introduced it in order to replace the battered old currency and also to stop the sort of use of the dollar. But people are very skeptical as to whether a new currency will actually make a difference without the central bank actually providing more reserves to back up this currency. The former chief economist in the finance ministry said that there were 5 currencies over the last 10 years, and that the new currency reflects more confusion within the government than a sense of stability that people are hoping for. So it's unlikely that the ZiG, as it is called, it's a short for the Zimbabwean gold currency, will actually make a difference, and that I think if you go to Zimbabwe, you're likely to have to trade with US dollars as it was in the past.
Indeed. So just explain how the changeover has been so problematic. I mean, how you go about, you said if you go to Zimbabwe now you have to use dollars.
Yes, I think that has been the case for a while, that even if you want to buy a few bananas, you are expected to pay in dollars because hyperinflation has been such a problem there that even traders, nobody is really willing to accept the dollar, to accept the Zimbabwean currency because it's unlikely to be worth anything the next day. So the dollar has been introduced in an informal way as a currency a few years ago. And from what I was reading, the traders and people in business are unlikely to accept this currency because it does not have enough backing in terms of foreign exchange reserves or gold in order to make it a robust currency that people are happy to hold on to and happy to trade with.
Let's move to Nigeria, to the huge city of Lagos. And there is an enormous museum which is incredibly beautiful.
Yes, it is indeed quite spectacular. It's opening to the public in autumn, and it is conceived as a museum that is telling the story of the Yoruba people, one of the big groups in Nigeria. It is quite spectacular in that the landscape is sort of incorporated, the Yoruba landscape is incorporated into the architecture. The building seems to emerge out of the ground with kind of slopes covered in grass rising gently. The curator and academic who helped steer the project, Will Rear, who was born in Nigeria, said that it's very different to a European museum as you walking into a soundscape. It's noisy, it's performative, it's very Lagos probably. It also incorporated an old pool that was built in the 1920s to help Nigerians learn how to swim. That was derelict for a very long time, and that has been incorporated into the landscape of the museum. And I think it's quite a spectacular building to visit once it opens in autumn.
Now, you said it's going to celebrate Yoruba culture.
Yes, it is. It is clearly dedicated to Yoruba culture, a culture that has influenced wide sections of Nigerian music, for example, Fela Kuti. And there's a lot of earth-colored pigment, reminiscent of the mud that's featured in old Yoruba settlements. A lot of gold has been used just as a reference to the craftsmanship of Yoruba people. So that is a clear reference in the architecture of this building.
Navina Kotter, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. The time is 7:31 here in London. Let's have a look at what else we're keeping an eye on today. Israel has closed one of the few routes into Gaza after Hamas fired rockets from within the strip towards the Kerem Shalom crossing. Hamas claimed it was targeting an Israeli army base. Thousands of Hungarians have protested against the Prime Minister Viktor Orban at a rally weeks ahead of European Parliament and local elections. Peter Magyar, a former government insider seen by some as the first serious threat in years to Mr. Orban, staged the rally attended by around 10,000 people. Panama's former security minister has won the country's presidential election. José Raúl Mulino was one of the favourites after he stepped in to replace the former president, who was barred because of money laundering convictions. And a concert put on by Madonna has drawn 1.6 million people to Brazil's famous Copacabana beach. The show in Rio was the final stop on her celebration tour to mark her 4 decades in music. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Let's head now to Bahrain, where Monocle contributor Marisa Marizria Katz has met an artist, philanthropist and member of the nation's royal family, spearheading multiple cultural initiatives to bolster the country's burgeoning art scene.
This was dialected place, run down.
This is Rashid Al Khalifa. He's a Bahraini artist who's exhibited internationally in places like Egypt, London, Moscow, and the Venice Biennale. Today he's taking me on a tour of a massive complex he built that he's calling the Art Station. It spans 3 floors. There are studios, dark rooms, a test kitchen, and all of them look out onto a light-filled courtyard. Next door is a restaurant, which is also part of the compound. In a few days, the Art Station will open, and dozens of local artists will take over the spaces.
So in total, we have over 30 units that will host artists, residencies, art gallery, concept store. So maybe we can go to this.
Across town, another building of his is also going up. This one will be the country's first museum dedicated to Middle Eastern art. Here he is, showing me around the construction site.
This area of the museum will be quite a dark painted space where I would host here a video artwork by a young Saudi artist and in this alcove here.
Rashid had his first art show in Bahrain at the age of 18. Around that time, the country gained independence from Britain. I asked him what the island nation's art scene was like back then.
At that time, they were just a self-taught artist, artists that they just started on their own initiatives, painted local scenes, and they sold them for some of the tourists the little tourists that visited the island at the time, and they just tried to make a living out of it. So there were not really much of a production, let's say, and also the lack of, art college for them was not there. So the self-taught artists, but they were passionate about what they were doing.
You studied art in London and then came back. Was there much of a scene when you came back home?
Yes, at my generations, there were quite a number of artists. Mainly, they were given scholarships to study abroad, art in the Middle East, like Baghdad at that time, Syria, Damascus, Cairo in particular, to come back as teachers, art teachers mainly. But of course, with their love and passion for art, they continued to practice and work. And we were also meeting together with them so that we became friends as a group.
Around this time, you formed the Bahrain Art Society. What did that collective actually do, and how did it transform the art scene here?
Because these youngsters who came back after studying abroad wanted to do something more modern and fast producing art, and also to do activities. And the older ones wanted to remain in their, sort of way of conducting themselves. So we formed this art society to help young artists and to gather. And we, from day one, we did many activities in Bahrain and abroad. And we gained a lot of members. We reached nearly to 200, 250 members. Also, we opened our art society for non-Bahrainis, for residents of Bahrain, and male and female. So that created a sort of, an impact on the society. Created, that the open door policy helped those who were shy of not exhibiting. There were those who were rejected and those who were not sort of expressing themselves. So it opened many doors to different individuals.
How has your involvement as an artist, as a practicing artist, how has that helped you to envision what's missing from the Bahraini art landscape and what is needed in order for more people to get involved?
You see, for years we have been longing to have some sort of, not a museum, art museum, but, more programs. We still don't have an art academy, which, by the way, I'm working on. We still don't have proper gallery setups. There are some galleries, but there isn't that structured management of galleries. There isn't that place where, you could go and learn. There isn't place that you go and, let's say, like a library or something, you do your research. There isn't documented information on past artists, the history. So we are still lacking a lot of, in many areas that need to be addressed. I saw all of that, and unfortunately, still, these loopholes here and there are not fulfilled, they are not covered. So I took my own initiative. I feel easier than convincing others. And sometimes, convincing others quite difficult,
With ArtStation and the Middle East Museum of Modern Art, you're creating, in many ways, the opportunities that weren't here for you when you were a young artist.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yes. Could you imagine of something, a place that you could visit as a young artist, somewhere that you could see other people's work, somewhere where you can have the opportunity to go to the library or to have your own workshops. It was just non-existent. I painted on the floor in our sitting room and made a mess of the floor, myself and others. So having what we have today would have been a great tool or means to improve yourself.
Back at the museum he's building for Middle Eastern art, he shows me a special room.
This room, in fact, has been allocated to be used by the Art Society members, for display, for meetings, for lecture.
What is it like for you, though, to have built this place and then to have the Art Society, which you founded, come in and be part of it?
Well, it's a great feeling because we are repeating what we started 40 years ago when we first moved in our first property. And now we see a branch coming into this space. It feels like coming home again.
And that was a report by Marisa Mazria Katz in Bahrain. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, Russian troops have been seen at an airbase in the capital of Niger. It's believed the airbase is currently hosting US troops who've been asked to leave the country. And to tell us more, I'm joined by Tara O'Connor, founder and executive director of Africa Risk Consulting, a pan-African consulting company. Very good morning to you, Tara.
Good morning.
And just remind us of the junta's decision to expel the US troops, please.
Yes, so this has been a long time coming, a back and forth between US diplomacy, which ended up with the US really pushing for the military junta to step out of power and to allow the elected leaders to resume their term of office, which failed. And at the same time, facing Russian competition for allegiance, the relations soured, and the military junta has actually ordered some 1,000 US military troops to leave.
The US had been a very welcome presence for quite a while, hadn't it?
Yes, and it had been operating very successfully its counterinsurgency operations, mainly by drone operations from the military base in Niger, which will obviously now cease. If and when US military do in fact leave, they haven't left yet, and they are stationed in a separate base to those where the Russians are.
So let's just be clear about this. The Russians are not there helping the US leave. They are actually being stationed in a separate hangar. I think it's in a place called Airbase 101.
That's right.
Do we know what the Russians are actually doing there and whether they will be mingling with US troops?
No, I don't think they will be mingling with US troops at all, and there is no concern of any hostilities or anything. It's just a question of logistics, and very much clearly that the Nigerian authorities are shifting their allegiance to Russian. And this is very much something that was heralded by Russia via its Telegram channel, that its objective for the Sahel has been to occupy and take over military bases across the Sahel, in Mali, in Niger, and possibly in Chad, that are currently occupied by Western military support for the counterinsurgency activities across the Sahel and in the Sahara.
So just explain a little bit more this wider Russian influence in this part of the world. I mean, we have seen that we saw Wagner troops last year turning up in variously large pockets of that area, especially the Sahel. But the fact now is that we have an official Russian presence as well. How does that change things, or has that changed at all?
This is very much, we are now seeing the strategy, I think Russia's strategy for the Sahel emerging very clearly. And what was a plausible deniability behind the Wagner Group is now very much a formal strategy. The Wagner Group has also been merged into what they are calling the Africa Corps, which obviously is a reference to the Nazi Germany World War II corps, that the Africa campaign in World War II. But the Africa Corps now is, the Wagner/Africa Corps is now coming very much under the Ministry of Defense in Russia. and has now got a presence in 3 countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and now in Niger, possibly about to enter Chad, which has elections today. So that will be 4 potential client countries. 3 of those countries have formed a kind of a Russia-style federation in an association of Sahelian states, which is primarily, first and foremost, a defense pact, but also an economic alliance that is very much Russian-backed.
Yes, tell us about this economic alliance, because we have the military presence, but Russia will be wanting even more.
Absolutely, and we've already seen in Mali, probably under the influence of the client-state relationship, and we've already seen Russia put pressure on gold mining companies, particularly Barrick Gold. There is an apparent threat of expropriation, and this goes back to the global geopolitical situation where Russia's assets have been seized. International assets have been seized. Russia, through social media, again, has threatened Western assets in areas of its control. So we've already seen that Barrick Gold in Mali, but also in Niger, Goviex, which is a small a junior mining company in the uranium space, has also been told to either start producing or have its license removed. So we're starting to see that sort of pressure. But the alliance of states is also an economic coalition which provides for a currency which would see the 3 or 4 countries they're looking to expand the alliance, dropping out of the French and Euro-backed CFA franc. So it is very much a moving, it's a growing influence in West Africa.
Thank you so much, Tara O'Connor, for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Time now for a quick chat about fashion with Dana Thomas, Paris-based author of Fashionopolis, The Price of Fast Fashion and the Future of Clothes. She joins me on the line from Paris. Good morning, Dana. How's Paris looking today?
I'm actually in Saint-Tropez right now because it's holiday month in France. So we've skipped town to avoid the Olympics construction and headed south.
You poor thing. I'm hoping there's sun.
There's no sun today, but that's okay.
It doesn't matter, does it? You're in Saint-Tropez. Okay, so in that context, while you're sort of taking blessed refuge from the rest of the world going bananas, it's the Met Gala today. So
it is the Met Gala. So, I am not in New York and I am ball.
Exactly. So everyone turns it up to 12. So what's happening?
Well, the gala to which I am not invited because Anna Wintour, the editor of American Vogue and the global, I can't remember her entire title, but the big boss of all the Vogues and all the Condé Nast magazines around the world, is also in charge of the Met Gala, which is tonight, the first Monday in May. And she chooses every single person, or she approves every single person who attends the Met. And, tables go for several $100,000 a piece, and she convinces brands to pony up that money. It is the biggest fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum of Art every year. Portion of it, a large portion goes to the Costume Institute, but a large portion also goes to the museum and keeps it afloat. Because the Met Museum, like your wonderful museums in the UK, and unlike Paris where I live, are free to admission. They ask for a little donation if you want to when you walk in, but you do not have to pay for tickets. to see the main collection. So, you need to raise some money to keep the place going, and that's what this party does.
One thing that quite a lot of questions are being asked is the outfit of a lady called Lauren Sanchez. Now, for those of us who don't know who Lauren Sanchez is, I heartily recommend you have a look, because she's quite an upfront lady, isn't she? And she is the
putting it.
She's the partner of Jeff Bezos, and Anna Wintour has...
fiancé.
I do apologise. Now, they've appeared in sort of quite a heavily stylised Vogue feature in the not-too-distant past, but that hasn't stopped Anna Wintour taking quite a strong decision about what Ms. Sanchez may be wearing.
Yes. Well, Ms. Sanchez showed up at the White House in a dress that sent protocol junkies kind of into a tizzy at the most recent state dinner for the Japanese Prime Minister and his wife. And there was lots of décolleté and a transparent bodice. And everyone thought this was just, out of control. How can she be the fiancé of the second richest man in the world and not have somebody on staff to tell her, you shouldn't wear that to the White House? So Anna Wintour has stepped in and is taking this in hand and is helping Miss Sanchez wear something appropriate this evening. Because there is always a theme that's supposed to go in hand with the exhibit. This year's exhibit is called Sleeping Beauty's Reawakening Fashion, which is an exhibit of all these beautiful old pieces that should be loved and not just looking at modern stuff.
It has got more and more ambitious in the last few years. I mean, the concepts have got wilder and wilder since the first inception.
Well, let's just talk about this for a moment. As I wrote in the Telegraph this weekend, the Cut, the New York Magazine website, reported on Friday something that I had written last summer, as I predicted. The retrospective, the show this season was supposed to be a retrospective of John Galliano's work, but the board put the kibosh on that, the museum board, most likely because of the Israel-Hamas war, because, John Galliano was fired for anti-Semitism, and they looked in their crystal ball and said, this might not be such a good idea, and boy, weren't they wrong, because 30 blocks away at Columbia University, you have these violent protests with police storming the campus, and can you imagine what would have happened at the Met Gala tonight if it had been for John Galliano, who was fired for anti-Semitism?
It would be even busier than Lauren Sanchez's outfits.
But it would have probably been cancelled.
But just explain a little bit more about how these decisions are made and who is chosen to sort of like to form the theme.
Oh, well, it's all Anna. It's just Anna and Andrew Bolton, who is the head curator of the Costume Institute, and they come up with these things together. So the dress code this time is Garden of Time, the Garden of Time, which actually sounds really beautiful. And I think it will be very beautiful as opposed to just outrageous, though there's always some outrageousness. We have the Kardashians showing up in what? And then, Rihanna always goes for big and big and big, and there's always somebody else who makes some sort of political statement or, looks kind of crazy, like when Jared Leto came dressed as what was he dressed as? A cat? I can't remember. But in any case, in a costume. And actually, the designer Tom Ford has even poo-pooed this, saying it's a shame that it's become this sort of weird, that they're embracing the Costume Institute's first word costume a little too literally now, guests, and really turning it into a masquerade party as opposed to an elegant affair.
Dana Thomas in Saint-Tropez, thank you so much for joining us on the line. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, from the wild outfits of the Met Gala to the gastronomy of the Oscars, this year's Academy Award saw the return of Elliot Grover, who cooked for the stars alongside longtime Oscars staple Wolfgang Puck. Monocle's Laura Kramer headed to his London restaurant in Mayfair to meet the chef and to hear and taste what was on the menu at Hollywood's biggest night.
I am Elliot Grover. I am the executive chef of 45 Park Lane Hotel and Cut by Wolfgang Puck. I did the Oscars this year, and I was the first British chef last year to ever cook at the Academy Awards. So it is quite amazing. I'm still having to pinch myself even now.
So how did that all come about?
2 years ago when I'd first started, I knew that Wolfgang Puck had been doing the Academy Awards. He'd been doing all the catering for literally, I think at this time it was 28 years. And I sort of thought, well, I'd like to go there as well and have a bit of that. I literally spoke to him on the phone and I just said, look, Wolfgang, is there any chance that I can come over to the Oscars and cook a dish? And he said, yeah, no problem. Within sort of 48 hours, the flight was booked, the hotel was organised. I literally just asked him on a whim and he said, yeah, let's go.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But then it got tricky after that because that's fine, all well and good. And then he's like, right, you're going to do one British dish. So it started off with one dish. And last year we did sherry trifle. We did an amazing fish and chips. So it was like super crispy, golden chips, triple cooked, zingy tartar sauce, and some beautiful piping hot haddock that's been sort of encased in this golden batter. It was amazing. And the third dish, beef Wellington. But he did that the night before the event. He told me and my head chef Ibrahim, he said, right, I want to do beef Wellington. And we had 12 hours to create 1,000 portions. So, yeah, it was a challenging day. That was last year, though, and this year we were more prepared, I'd say.
Well, clearly he liked what you did. The people liked what you did because they got invited back.
He did invite me back this year. And again, he said, we really want to celebrate Great Britain and we want to do something to represent the restaurant in London cut. So we did roast beef, Yorkshire puddings, creamed horseradish, lobster fish and chips this year with tartar sauce. And then we did a beautiful prawn cocktail roll served in a small brioche, which is sort of buttery, delicious and rich. And then we got the Mary Rose sauce, which we actually put a bit of creamed horseradish in. So it gives it that pepperiness to cut through that butter of the brioche.
What are some things you have to take into account when you create dishes like this for the Oscars that you wouldn't think you'd have to take into account for other high-profile events?
I think the one thing you need to consider is, obviously, it's a vast amount of people. And to be honest with you, the dishes we were serving were unique to the event. Obviously, when they're walking around after they've won the award, there needs to be sort of small bites. So as you can imagine, 3 chips, 1 beautiful claw of lobster, and then a bit of tartar sauce. And we put a little bit of lemon in there. And then we've got a proper chip shop fork to give it that real authenticity. And obviously, they always have the same dishes. So he does his smoked salmon pizza with the black truffle, all that kind of thing.
Famous.
Yeah, the famous dishes that Wolfgang always does. And we created something with a bit of a buzz around it, being from the UK. So a lot of the Americans actually love fish and chips and they love the roast beef Yorkshire pudding. So they would congregate around our stall. So it was basically, there was only around 4 or 5 chefs that were actually only allowed in the main ballroom. And he always locates me underneath where so they get their Oscar once they've won. But there's actually no engravings on the Oscar. And the person that showed me that was Brendan Fraser. Brendan Fraser come up to me with the Oscar, took the fish and chips, said it was delicious, and I said, can I have a look at the Oscar? He showed me, and his name wasn't even on it. So basically they've located me in a place where they get their Oscar engraved on the stand, then they come down, and obviously they're very hungry, and they eat there. So I was stood next to Lady Gaga, Lenny Kravitz, Margot Robbie this year. It was crazy. Obviously, she didn't win an award, unfortunately, but... And
so how soon do you get to find out if you are going to go back to the Oscars? You already know?
Sort of already know that we're going down. We already know. I think that's what Wolfgang likes as well. It's we've got such a wonderful friendship. I mean, I speak to him daily. He will already joke around and will say, well, what are we serving at the Academy Awards next year?
So what are you?
Well, I think that the roast beef Yorkshire pudding, which I'll show you in a moment, the fish and chips we need to keep, what's more British than that? These 2 dishes they're almost iconic now, I'd say. And they've only been there 2 years. I think I'll change the prawn cocktail, but I'm not sure what yet. But as soon as I know, I'll let you know the secret, and maybe you can give me some help with it.
That was the chef Elliot Grover serving up a very British menu to Monocle's Laura Kramer. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests. And thanks too to our producers Laura Kramer and Carlos Rebello. Our researcher was George Ruskin. Our studio manager was Mariella Bevan with editing assistance from Christy O'Grady. After the headlines, more music is on the way. The briefing is live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. Join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great week.